Much of Israel came to a grinding halt on Monday as the country has seen an outpouring of protests. Israel over the weekend revealed that 6 hostages had been killed just moments before the IDF team could reach them. It has brought to the fore deep resentment and anger towards the Benjamin Netanyahu government and its war strategy over reluctance to swiftly agree to a ceasefire with Hamas. In the broadest expression of anti-government dissent since this war began, tens of thousands, led by the families of the kidnapped hostages, joined forces to pressure Benjamin Netanyahu to agree to a truce in Gaza. Only a ceasefire could facilitate the release of dozens of hostages who are still held in captivity by Hamas. After the October 7th Hamas terror attack last year, more than 240 hostages were taken into captivity by the terror organization. Even today, over 100 are still in Hamas custody. The strike that was called by unions and business leaders brought about widespread disruptions across Israel. Schools, hospitals, municipal offices across the country were all closed. In Jerusalem, the rail network was closed until midday. And in Tel Aviv, workers at the Ben Gurion International Airport, which is the country's largest airport, also joined the strike for a part of the day. The strike reflects a national outpouring of both grief and fury after the bodies of 6 hostages were recovered in Gaza over the weekend. Advocates for the hostages and critics of the Netanyahu government have argued that only a ceasefire agreement, had it been in place, could have saved the lives of these 6 hostages. Netanyahu so far has refused to agree to a ceasefire that will involve Israel's temporary withdrawal from Gaza or lead to any kind of permanent halt to the fighting. His justification is that either of these two moves would allow Hamas to survive, and that could be a danger to Israel's long-term security. As a result, Hamas has also refused to compromise, saying it will not release more hostages without a permanent ceasefire. Israel's health ministry on Sunday said that forensic examination showed the hostages had been shot at point-blank range sometime between Thursday and Friday morning. The Israeli military straightaway blamed Hamas for the killings, and the raw responses of tens of thousands of people to these deaths have put into focus the stark divisions within Israel. Many hostage families and their supporters have called for a deal with Hamas, even if that means Hamas survives as a terrorist entity. Netanyahu and his allies have said that a bad deal with Hamas could put Israel's long-term security at risk. Protesters flooded the streets of Israeli cities all through Sunday in mass demonstrations demanding that the government immediately accept a deal for the release of hostages. The furious protests, some of the largest that the country has seen in months of failed negotiations, came after the Israeli army announced that 6 of these hostages had been killed. In Tel Aviv, the protest organizers put the number in hundreds of thousands who turned up for these protests. Hostage families and a crowd of supporters carrying 6 mock coffins went through a march across the city. They swarmed in front of the Israeli military headquarters. There was even a clash with the police on a major highway. In Jerusalem, the Israeli police fired water cannons and forcefully removed a crowd of hundreds who were rallying at the main entrance of the city. In smaller cities too, like in Rehovot in central Israel, people blocked traffic and chanted, "We want them back living, not in coffins." The national uproar built after months of protests and increasingly aggressive actions by the hostages' families who've been attempting to put pressure on Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The frustration of these families have accused Netanyahu of sacrificing their loved ones for his own political gain. Things appear to be reaching a boiling point over the weekend after the Israeli military discovered the bodies of 6 hostages in a tunnel crossing in Rafah, the southern city, which Hamas has occupied for the better part of the last year. The Israeli health ministry has said that these hostages were shot at close range between Thursday and Friday. Their blood was on the hands of the Israeli government, according to the Hostages and Missing Families Forum, which is a group that represents some of these relatives. It called on the public to bring the nation to a halt. And that message was echoed by Israel's largest labor union, which also declared a strike for Monday. And it was also reflected by Yair Lapid, who is the main opposition leader in Israel. After hours of demonstrations, the Israeli police said it had arrested over 24 people in Tel Aviv alone, and they cleared the main highway connecting the capital to Jerusalem. 5 protesters were also arrested in Jerusalem and 2 in Haifa. Protesters expressed a mix of grief and rage. Many of them were carrying photographs of the hostages. Some of them were seen waving yellow ribbons in solidarity with the hostage families. Also on Sunday, Israel's Defense Minister Yoav Gallant appeared to protest against Netanyahu's approach to these ceasefire negotiations. On the social media platform X, the Defense Minister Gallant responded to the news of the dead hostages by calling for a reversal of the cabinet decision last week, which would keep Israel's forces in the Philadelphia Corridor. Now, the Philadelphia Corridor is a narrow strip of land on the border between Gaza and Egypt, which Israeli officials say Hamas has been using to smuggle in weapons. The killing of the hostages and the mass protests have also rung across the United States. President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris are scheduled to meet at the White House with a team representing the United States in negotiations over this potential hostage deal. One of the hostages who died, Hirsch Goldberg Polin, is an American national. His parents, in fact, had spoken very passionately just last week at the Democratic National Convention in Chicago.
Hirsch, if you can hear us, we love you. Stay strong. Survive.
Bring them home.
The killings and subsequent national protests have straight away put pressure on both Biden and Harris. Harris has already tried to do a balancing act, saying that Israel has the right to defend itself, but at the same time stressed the need for an immediate ceasefire.
As I said then, I say today, Israel has a right to defend itself. We would. And how it does so matters. Far too many innocent Palestinians have been killed. And we have got to get a deal done.
Her main challenger for the November election, Donald Trump, the former president, has immediately blamed the failed policies of both Biden and Harris for the killing of the hostages. Mediators from Qatar, Egypt, and the United States have made several attempts in recent weeks to bridge the gap between Israel and Hamas to find an elusive ceasefire deal. Both Israel and Hamas have blamed each other at times for obstructing progress towards a ceasefire. But the turning point came back in July when Netanyahu set new conditions, and that raised questions about whether the Israeli Prime Minister was really interested in a ceasefire deal, or did he want to just prolong it for his own political continuity. Hamas, for its part, has requested its own extensive revisions to the ceasefire agreement, and in fact has refused any truce that would see it give up power in Gaza. It has also defied international calls to release the hostages unconditionally. 4 of the 6 hostages whose bodies were recovered were included in a list of those who Israel was demanding to be released in the first phase of a 3-phase agreement. Israel's list had placed Eden Yerushalmi and Carmel Gat in the category of civilian women and children. At the same time, Hirsch Goldberg Polin and Almog Sarusi were included among the ill and wounded. In addition to a full withdrawal, Hamas has demanded that Israel agree to end the war completely. Netanyahu has said that he wants a partial deal first that will allow for Israel to resume the war after freeing some of the hostages. As of now, it seems that this latest hostage killing would precipitate both Israel and the United States to push towards a more decisive resolution to this nearly 11-month-old war.